start with like your background, how you came to G4 or whatever incarnation it was,
Yep.
and what your at least position was, at the very beginning. So kind of like your name, rank, serial number,
Sure.
and what led you there.
So in 2001, I interviewed right after September 11th. So you're talking like, mid-September 2001. I became the assistant to the senior vice president of ad and affiliate sales, a woman named Gail Hopkins. This is pre-launch. Nobody knew that G4 existed. They didn't even really tell me much about it. They just said they're making a TV network about video games. And I said, cool. And I went in and did the interview and got the job, which at that point was not a lot. It was, executive assistant work, keeping a calendar, fetching dry cleaning. I wrapped her kids' Christmas presents. And then somewhere in the afternoon, all of us that were at the network at that time, probably about 4 o'clock, when all of our pretending that there was work to be done was done, we would hop onto our computers and play Counter-Strike for 4 or 5 hours. And then I would come home around 9 o'clock.
So what then, if there's a moment like, for example, the signing of the Declaration of Independence?
Sure.
Right? That's a critical moment in American history. What was the moment that you would identify as G4 being born? And this is before the network, like, physically was on the air.
Yeah, I don't know that I was there for that thing. There were 5 or 6 people. I don't know if you're talking to like Scott Rubin. Josh Crane would certainly talk to you, but I think I told you that he and I don't necessarily speak anymore. There was like 6 or 7 people that I think it was in Deborah Green's kitchen. Deborah Green was the COO, conceived of the network with Charles Hirschhorn. So if you want that backstory, I would hit up Rubin. I'm sure Josh Crane would talk to you and enjoy telling you how important he was for G4. But that's the moment you're looking for, by the way. For me, it was leading up to actual launch. My role, there's the 2 sides of ad sales, right? There is the TV commercials that you see on the network, right? And then there's the affiliate sales model, which is the cable companies pay a license fee back to G4 on a monthly basis per subscriber. And so you have these two bits of revenue coming in. And those deals are generally long deals. They're 10-year deals. And when you're a piddly little network like G4, it's probably free for the first couple of years. And then it becomes like 5 cents per subscriber per month, from most of these don't exist anymore. Time Warner Cable, Cox Cable, Adelphia, DirecTV, Dish Network. And so those are the 2 sort of sales divisions, right? And so I helped, because I was working in the ad and affiliate sales department, I would help sort of just field calls from these cable affiliates. And when we launched the network, and back when you could launch cable networks, you would always launch them with a stunt, right? You would try to do a thing that would garner press, both in the sort of the consumer press and the B2B press, where people would be like, there's this crazy thing happening on this new cable channel. And for us, it was the 7 Days of Pong. And so we broadcast nothing but like old school Atari style 8-bit Pong, which was actually a flash program created by Derek Snowden. And it was just that for 7 days, 24 hours a day. And because I answered the phone for the head of the ad and affiliate sales department, the cable affiliates who didn't know this is how we were starting the network, who hadn't paid attention to any of the email blasts or the notifications, were calling her up and being like, what the fuck is this? What are we doing? What is this? This is video game television. It's just this fucking game. And so we'd have to explain to them. And I wish I still had some of the voicemails. Dale and I will joke about it from time to time. But the cable affiliates freaking out about Pong was for me that moment.
Now, what was after that 7 days of Pong? What was the very first thing that people saw?
So after the Pong, so Pong started on April 24th, I believe, and ran for 7 days and nights, full 24 hours a day. The very first show on our network was a show called Blister. That was, if I recall, about action games. Bill Sindelar, I think, was the host. And I don't remember much about it, but I do remember that the very first ad we ever ran was a Star Wars trailer. So this would have been, you're talking 2002, which would make this prequel, I think. I think that's a prequel. That was the first ad that ever ran on G4.
Attack of the Clones.
Yeah, that would be it. Yeah, Attack of the Clones.
1999 was Phantom Menace. Yes,
yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So then how did these shows, as you were developing the shows, and I assume that you were involved in some of this development, right? In
I can talk to it. I wasn't really involved, so
what were these?
So it's interesting when you're, the concept of a network about video games didn't exist, right? And so you had a mix of really young people who were passionate about video games and some older heads who had experience in making TV and cable TV specifically. There was a bunch of people that were like old MTV folks. And so you were just sort of throwing stuff on the wall to see if it would stick. You were honestly, the very early iterations of shows were like, well, let's think about the different types of video games. There are action video games. Okay, that's Blister. There are sports video games. Okay, that's Sweat. There was a show about multiplayer games called Arena, which was the Will Wheaton show. And so they were just very generic, right? They were generic because he just kind of nobody knew how to make, at that point, content about video games. And so we were figuring it out as we went.
And then as you're figuring it out, certain types of hosts began to emerge. Can you talk about Kevin Pereira's emergence on the network?
Sure. The first time I remember meeting Kevin Pereira, I think he was an intern on a show that was awkwardly titled G4TV.com, which was also the URL of our website. G4TV.com was a sort of community-driven show. It was actually a great idea. For the time, it was super innovative because people weren't thinking about TV as a two-way interactive medium at the time. But it was hosted by Scott Rubin, who was one of the founders of the network, Laura Foy, and Tina Wood. And they just had sort of an interactive talk show, again, called G4TV.com. And if I remember correctly, Pereira was an intern on that show, or maybe a PA. And over time, he ended up, there was some sort of issue with Will Wheaton and the other host of Arena and Jim Downs, who was one of the executive producers. Jim Downs, who has since passed, great dude. He went on to be one of the people who really sort of created Attack of the Show. Like he's very responsible for a lot of what AOTS became and some of the tone. Jim was Furry Friday, was entirely for and because of Jim, and really only for Jim. I enjoyed it, but no one enjoyed it as much as Jim did.
Well, I remember Jim because I remember he dressed like a furry on some of those days, and I went to his funeral. Yeah. It wasn't a funeral; it was a wake, and it was at a bar on Sunset.
Yeah, I was there.
Oh, you were there as well. I remember I was there. Yeah. And he died in some fluke accident.
He passed? It was like he was scouting, I think, for some sort of outdoorsy show, and he was on an ATV that I think he rolled down a mountain. If you end up talking to Scott Rubin, he would have more on that. But it's important to get a little bit of Jim in this doc, because Attack of the Show, kind of what it became, especially in the really early Goofy days, before it sort of moved into like what I think most people think about with Kevin and Olivia and the big set. The early days, the sort of right after Screensavers into Attack of the Show, was sort of Jim's crazy pants vehicle.
Yeah, he's the second person I know who's died in a freak ATV accident. That I will never be on one of those things. It's like, yeah.
So Kevin, I don't know the how it ended up happening, but Kevin ended up hosting Arena, which was the sort of LAN party competitive gaming show. And it was just really clear that, like, even though he was young, even though he couldn't grow a real mustache, he was super talented and super witty. And it kind of didn't matter what you wrote in the script because he was just going to go. And he just kind of blew up from there.
In terms of, did you, when you met Kevin, is there an anecdote or something you can say about him, about first meeting him and what he was like and how he definitely was different? I mean, I can say for myself that he was different than any kind of host. I don't know anyone as quick-witted as him. Like, he was born, bred in a lab to be a television host, and he only got better as I worked with him, and he made everyone around him better. And I don't know anyone who had a better off-camera. What was weird was here's the question that I would get from people: is Kevin really like that? Like off camera, I found him to be humble, quieter, more low key, and then on camera, it was like he was like, I always described him as he's like Bugs Bunny.
Yeah,
he was there to instigate everyone and get everyone else in trouble. And once you're kind of processing the thing he just said 10 seconds ago, he's already made two other comments, and keeping up was challenging because I've never worked with anyone like that in television. He's really.
No.
Do you have an anecdote yourself about that?
Not really. Kevin was pretty young when I met him. Right, he had just joined the network, and he was obviously very quick-witted and funny. One of the funnier people that I've ever worked with and ever known. And we became good friends. He's on camera, had this ability to turn it on, and almost in a Robin Williams style, just rapid fire, obscure internet humor, old movie references, old TV references, things that were sort of like he shouldn't know because he was, 21, 22 at the time. And I would watch him, especially as he started to grow, and you'd watch him on air, and he would fire off 3 or 4 obscure references, some of them wholly inappropriate for television, before anybody else reacted and before anybody in like standards and practices even knew. And it was amazing because it would just be kind of a fun game for him to see what like trolly internet inappropriate joke can I just slip in here that none of the adults are paying attention to and understand. And it's amazing. He's naturally so gifted at just going and going and going. And I imagine that it was probably pretty difficult to keep up with him if you were on set with him, in front of the cameras.
Well, I can say that that's an absolute certainty that it was. But also I feel like what he did was, if he was an actor, it's like he didn't make it easy for me, and that was a good thing.
Yeah,
that meant that I had to step up. So,
he was, like there are people who are pure professionals who want to make everyone else. This is, between you and I, they want to make everyone else around him good, right, and lift everybody up. I think Kevin just took it as a challenge, right. In some ways, Kevin Pereira was this first expression of what like this entire generation was about on the internet. And he was the first guy on TV that was their avatar, right? Like quick-witted, hilarious jokes, kind of Reddit and dig before Reddit and dig. Like he was the first of those that I can ever remember seeing on traditional television.
Can you tell me what led to this? Is Screensavers was on Tech TV.
Yeah, you want me to give you the business background on like Tech TV and Screen?
The business background of the merger of G4 and Tech TV coming together. And Tech TV also had all these other shows. So tell me about the shows on there and what was sort of the how that came together in kind of a messy way, but like.
Yeah, I'll give you what I can, and I'll lead that into attack. So here, let me get the date. Hold on a second. Text TV.
Anywhere you can fill in with like dates and general city. Like, I hate to say that, like, imagine if I'm like the guy taking the police report and we want to get like the dates, the time.
I'll try to give you that. I'm going to Google it while I'm sitting here, but yes, I'll give you that. So, all right, let me give you a little bit of a business background. So when you launch a cable television channel, you aren't typically Nielsen rated until you're in, I think it was like 30 million homes. And it's hard to sell ads to advertisers if you can't offer them a return on their investment in the form of, this is how many people saw your ad. So growing those, growing your subscriber base. Again, this is not a thing that happens anymore because you don't launch cable channels anymore. That's just not a thing. And G4 was really one of the very last cable channels ever launched. There might have been a couple afterwards, but really it was the end of this sort of linear cable era before we got to streaming and whatever the fuck it is we watch now. And so, G4 from 2002 to 2004 was growing, but it's slow. And until you can bring up the amount of subscribers you have and get to this critical mass, which at the time was like you're in 80 million homes, which basically means you're on basic cable and you're available everywhere. It was hard to attract advertisers. And until you get a high enough subscriber base, you're not really going to get Nielsen rating. And so it's this weird sort of vicious circle. And so Comcast ended up purchasing Tech TV, would have been March of 2004, with the intent to merge them together. And, it was a pretty good fit, not a perfect fit. Tech TV's audience was older. Like, they were hardcore. They were, they loved their screensavers. They loved their X-Play. They loved Leo Laporte. But it was really the difference between going to Fry's and going to Best Buy, right? G4 was shinier and younger, right? And goofier. And Tech TV it had comedy, but it was a little bit more earnest, and it was like purely nerd. G4 was geeky and Tech TV was nerdy, if I can, I think they both sort of fit. So the merge together from a business perspective for Comcast made beautiful sense because you're able to grow the subscriber base high enough. I don't remember exactly how many homes Tech TV was in, but it was in more than we were. And the concept was bring in take the shows in that are doing well, that fit, which was Screensavers and X-Play. They had a robot battle show, I think, on Tech TV. They had some anime that ran on Tech TV. And, at first, right, probably to those same cable affiliate agreements that you're locked into for 10 years, they will define the kind of content you have. They will want you to say, we're content about video games or we're content about sports, because if you're charter cable, you want to make sure you're offering a diverse offering to the people that are paying you. So for a little while, we were G4 Tech TV. I think it might have been about 6 months before just dropping the Tech TV part and being G4. And there was certainly a culture shock for the folks that came down from Tech TV to work at G4. There were a lot of people who lost their jobs. There were a lot of people who just didn't want to move down. And there was just, I wouldn't call it animosity, but it's the same as any company. Like, the people that worked at Tech TV loved Tech TV, and it sucked for them. Ultimately the folks that came down and stuck around integrated into G4, and it helped turn X-Play into a bigger thing. Obviously the Kevin Roses and the Sarah Lanes stuck around for a little while. The Screensavers made sense on G4.
I recall especially reading the forums, because I would read the forums on G4TV.com, that people complain about Tech TV until the very bitter end of G4. It was like, that was a complaint that if there was the ugliness of the internet or pre-Reddit, like those forums were kind of like that. And I do feel that comes from a place of passion. I wouldn't say that it was, I mean, you could read it as overly negative, but it was like, these were super hardcore fans. Yeah. And until the bitter end, they talked about tech TV. I remember we just come up like not a day went by where there wasn't a tech TV reference even years after the fact.
Chris, go look at the comments on the teaser that G4 just released, and I guarantee there are tech TV references in there. 100%, right? To some degree, like the people that were hardcore tech TV fans, think of them like they were Van Halen fans, right? And they were not cool with Sammy Hagar, right? When that happened, like that's for them, tech TV was their baby, right? It was their passion. And so, I understand, but it was probably the difference between, tech TV eventually going away entirely or surviving in some fashion. And I like to think that, what became of X-Play, and certainly the way that the screensavers morphed into Attack of the Show ended up keeping some of the spirit there. And, I think it did pretty well.
It did for me. I mean, I do recall, because I was a screensaver watcher and I was an X-Play watcher. And I remember the thing that struck me about screensavers was, Leo Laporte. And there were a lot of in-depth, like, let's build a computer. Let's, we're going to put a new graphics card in this thing. It was more hardcore and I mean, it was way more detailed, at least. And then I think people kind of packaged the same, that kind of thing, but did it in a way that maybe was more palatable and mainstream.
I would say that the screensavers specifically, and Leo, who I adore, they weren't making entertainment, right? It wasn't entertainment, certainly not for a more mass audience. And, I Attack of the Show eventually kind of got away from all of that stuff, but certainly at the beginning found a way to package it in a more entertaining way, in a funnier way, and certainly in a more accessible way. But, the screensavers a lot of times was, if you were nerdy, you enjoyed it because it was someone that looked like you, someone that talked like you, that was like building a PC from scratch on live television. And that's cool, but that's not really like entertainment. Right? That's a how-to video on YouTube now. You would never put that on television.
But it's interesting because Leo Laporte continued, if I recall correctly, he continued to do screensaver-like stuff on YouTube.
He did on YouTube. Did he do it for Rev 3? Can't remember if he was part of that or not.
That was it. Yeah.
I'm not sure what he's doing now. I hope that he's happy. And it made me really happy when at the very, very end, like the last moments of Attack of the Show, that he participated in the little skit that happened. Like that, I thought that was rad.
Let's talk about the development of Attack of the Show. Sure. When were there discussions about the screensavers might not be the most palatable name? And if you can also recall, what were some of the other names that were considered or in the running for Attack of the Show? Oh, and if you could repeat a little bit. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to give you a great answer here, but I'll do my best. So, at some point post G4 Tech TV becoming G4, there was a need to sort of revamp the screensavers. There was an internal contest to think of a new name for the show. And if I recall, the prize for coming up with a new name was like an iPod video, maybe an iPod Nano. This was, it was a different time. It was an iPhone that couldn't make phone calls, basically. And Mike Shaw came up with the name Attack of the Show and had this rad explanation for why the show was Attack of the Show, and he ended up winning an iPod of some sort.
if I recall correctly, and I might have a copy of that memo, although I'll talk to Mike about it.
I'm sure he has the Word doc still.
It's a document where it was a little bit of a mission statement. It was perhaps Jerry Maguire inspired.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
But it was like this mission statement about what Attack of the Show was represented.
I'll look and see if I have it for you. I don't think I do.
If you could find that, that'd be great. Because the email address I used while I worked at G4, I no longer have. Like,
I sent you the original G4 website, right?
What's that?
Did I send you the full G4 original flashlight?
I don't believe. If you could send that to me.
Okay. Email me afterwards and remind me. It's on a drive. I think it was on the thing I sent you. It's a series of folders. You have to open it up like a local web browser, and it will be all the little. It'll be a second of early B-roll for you, but was an orange flash website with cutesy little animations of the old logo. And if you need to, I have most every logo the network ever used.
Okay, great. And then. Okay, but do you recall at all what were some of the other names considered?
I don't. I wasn't part of the decision process, and I don't recall any of them.
Okay, I will find that out.
Oh yeah, you should. That'd be good.
I want to get those what the show could have been, and actually redo those logos into what the show. A lot of some. Well, let's talk about some of the casting, right?
Sure.
I mean, Screensavers kind of had some of the legacy cast, right? Sarah Lane being among them. And what was the name? The guy that it was very much, I believe, inspired by General Hospital and Luke and Laura. When she married one of the guys who was a guy who would do field pieces. What was his name? Yeah, Brendan.
Yeah.
They got married.
Brendan Moran.
Brendan Moran. They were going to travel for a year, and I don't think it lasted a year.
I don't think so either. I don't know. Sarah Lane was a lovely person. I always enjoyed my interactions. Could not be nicer. Kevin Rose was obviously destined for bigger things. From what I hear, he's done all right for himself. I didn't know too much of the cast. I got to know Adam and Morgan when they came down from X-Play. It's interesting. I think I don't know that Morgan ever really enjoyed doing television. I really think she just kind of wanted to hang out and talk about video games, and making TV and making X-Play was just a byproduct of it.
Can I tell you my dirty secret?
Sure.
I don't enjoy doing television either.
Oh,
I've done it because people have invited me to do it. My TV career began doing one audition, and then I just kept getting hired, and it was just an easier job, and it sort of gave me the marketing to do other.
Yeah, it was a means to an end. You're not, you're good at it, and it's a means to an end, and it's probably better than working for a living.
Exactly. Yeah. So back to so the legacy people like Sarah Lane and Kevin Rose and whatnot. And you're meshing them. How were those okay, we're going to bring in, here's the old people, here's the older group, the newer group, they're coming together. And they're not even older, newer. They're just separate groups.
Yeah. I don't know that I have a lot of insight on that. Ryber might. Have you ever reached out to Peter Green? Do you know Peter?
I don't.
Peter Green was Ryber before Ryber.
Oh, then I talked to him.
Yeah, he's worth talking to. Certainly he ran that whole content group, I think, during the Tech TV transition and the beginning of Attack of the Show. He's worth talking to.
Gotcha.
He can give you a lot. He's the guy who would give you crazy casting stories, and this is who we considered, and these were some of the other names. And I can connect you if you want, if you're not already connected to him.
Okay, cool. So when Attack of the Show launched, I mean, here's what I'll say about it is that I was there. So I was probably on the second episode. I was on 3 episodes of the Screensavers because I'll have my own story as I'm kind of the bookends in the documentary. I kind of lead you in.
Yeah.
fan who was on the show, and then it's all about everything else. And then I kind of book them at the end. I'm putting myself. I'm trying to not be on camera as much as possible.
No, I understand.
But that sort of launch of it, what do you recall as being that launch of Attack of the Show and the reaction to it, the reaction at the time for that? Because I remember people coming to me saying, and I remember even hearing the name of the show thinking that's the dumbest name I've ever heard for a show. Yep. I thought it was stupid when I initially heard it because I thought it was inspired by Attack of the Clones. Revenge of the Sith had not yet come out.
Yeah.
And it was like Attack of the Show. Attack of the Show? Like, I mean, there's that footage of Ewan McGregor learning what the second Star Wars movie was going to be, second Star Wars prequel was going to be called, and he's at Cannes on the red carpet. Attack of the Clones? Attack of the Clones? Like, so what was your initial, what was that first few weeks like of trying to sell this to people? You're taking
I don't have much for you on this.
Oh, you don't?
No, I mean, I'm trying to think of what I would have been. So that's Attack of the Show is 2005. At that point, I would have been in ad sales. No, I probably was already running digital. So, I don't really have anything for the beginning. I might be able to give you some color, like, I was around for and had to help deal with putting a web server in somebody's ass. Have you covered that story yet?
Oh, yes, we have. But please tell it in your words.
Yeah.
I was there the day it happened.
Yeah, and we're not mentioning who it was, right? Like you're keeping that. Okay, yeah. So, I don't know where I was when I heard that we were going to put a web server inside somebody's ass live on television. But I knew that I had to deal with it because I was going to have to arrange to have that web page actually served. At the time I was running digital, running G4TV.com. It was a special day. It was a funny day. And as gross in some ways as it was, I think it kind of perfectly encapsulated the ridiculous fun vibes of Attack of the Show. And frankly, sort of the sense that we can do whatever we want. And we did.
I'll say that when that happened, I think that's when the show started to come into its own, so to speak.
I think so too.
So let's get the sort of three major things, 3 or 4 major questions. Any sort of host stories behind the scenes that you can tell?
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of a little bit about what we talked about before at the beginning but didn't record, about can AOTS be done today, or what aspects can or cannot be done.
Okay.
Let's talk about
the third.
And then the cancellation, like how things what happened.
Yeah, so I don't know that I have any host stories for you. When I think about where the peak of G4 and it's specifically Attack of the Show it's got to be around 2012. So by 2012, the writers, the producers, and especially Kevin and Olivia really had a groove. The network as a whole kind of found a home that was big tentpole events around Comic-Con, E3, Tokyo Game Show, Gamescom out in Germany. And you sort of have these big events and really rally towards them as a reason to turn on your linear cable television. Because by 2012, Reddit's starting to be a thing, and the internet, like the content on YouTube, is very much a thing at that point. But it was worth turning on your television to see what Kevin and Olivia had to say about the day's news, and certainly worth turning it on to watch the E3 coverage and the Comic-Con coverage. And so we were really and at the time I was running the website, and so traffic was up, and we'd have these big events and big live streams. We were live, back then we were live streaming all the big E3 press conferences and some of the panels from the big halls at Comic-Con, and really nobody else was doing it at the time. So really the network was really going great. And then DirecTV dropped us. And really, to me, that was the beginning of the end for G4. And it kind of had nothing to do with G4. DirecTV was fighting with, at the time, it would have been NBC Universal, about carriage for other channels that had, within the family that had nothing to do with us. And that's how those things go, right? That's business, and that's life in linear cable. We certainly had a lot of advantages by being part of the NBC Universal family and being able to negotiate with E! and Sci-Fi and Bravo. But when there was a dispute about one of those other channels, G4 was the one that they could cut and get away with. And so that's really, to me, and that happened, I believe, in 2012. And that was to me, that was the beginning of the end, both of the network and Attack of the Show and, frankly, the dream. After it was pretty clear that G4, after G4 was getting canceled, right? At the time, would have been, they changed leadership. They brought in Adam Stotsky over from within the NBC Universal family to run the network. And, we knew there were going to be changes, right? And the idea was to make G4 essentially a Bravo style network for men, right? Upscale, urban, to some degree hipster, right? Which wasn't really, it wasn't like, listen, I'm not a fan of it. It wasn't for me, but I understood the business case for it, right? There was a good business case for trying to make the G4 audience more valuable to advertisers and to the cable affiliates, right? And so, I stayed on through that transition. And G4 was scheduled to go off the air, would have been December 31st, 2014. And, shows had been off for a while. Lots of staff had been laid off, lots of ramping up to what Esquire was going to become. And myself and a couple of the other G4 old heads wanted to do something to sort of commemorate the end. It was me and Derek Snowden and Doug Bowman and Matt Monos. And we wanted to do something. We couldn't figure out what it was. And we sort of landed on going back to how it started and running a game of Pong that slowly faded out and blipped into obscurity. And because no one else really cared, Derek and I inserted a sound up from one of our all-time favorite moments from anything that G4 ever did, which was this kid that Kevin Pereira was interviewing at Comic-Con, dressed up in his sort of cardboard outfit. And Kevin's just trying to get him to say something to open a segment. And he's like, hey, where are we? And he's like, huh? And he's like, tell me you're at Comic-Con. And the guy goes, I'm at Comic-Con! And it was an Easter egg that we used to just stick throughout the website for years. And it was funny only to us. And that is actually the last bit of sound that ended up airing on G4.
Dude, that's awesome.
So you can find it. We can find the original video for you, but it's on there. You'll find it on YouTube. When I think about what G4 was and how the world has changed, I mean, even towards the end of G4, one of the challenges with putting even live programming on television in the era of like Dig and Reddit was that most of the stuff we were talking about was already on Dig and Reddit, right? And we were broadcasting to an audience that was on Dig and Reddit all day anyway. So the ATN videos, the hardcore audience already saw them. And so, the value that I think the network brought was commentary on those things. And Kevin was obviously excellent at it, right? The world is, I was thinking about this the other day, that, when you just think about meme culture, right? If you go back to mid 2000s through the end of G4, when you thought about memes, they were all joyful, right? It was, ceiling cat watching you masturbate, which maybe not the most joyful thing, but that makes me laugh. It was, funny stuff and joyful stuff and friendly stuff. And now, if I say meme out loud, it's probably, you think about like Nazis and hate crimes, because that's what memes have become, right? The world is just rougher now than it was back then. And I really think that G4, and more specifically Attack of the Show, happened at this moment and celebrated a moment of sort of joyful nerdiness that feels like it couldn't exist now, certainly not on television. Fun aside for you, which you could use if you want. So in my old office at G4, I took I printed out a picture of Ceiling Cat. Ceiling Cat's watching you masturbate. It's the hole with the cat, right? And I put it up in the vent. There was like the lights had these sort of grid on them, and I put it up on the backside of one of these grids so that you could only see it if you were sitting at my desk, and I would look up occasionally, and it would make me happy to see Ceiling Cat watching me work. And I left it there. So this is the old G4 building before we moved to Wilshire and moved in with E, and then before they moved to the lot. That building is now Riot Games. It's their studio, right? So their offices are across the street. It's on Olympic. And then they use all of our old staging. The original sort of Attack of the Show staging is where they do huge League of Legends tournaments and stuff. And 4 or 5 years ago, I had an opportunity for sort of a quasi interview. It was a get to know you with some leadership over there. And I was considering going to work at Riot Games. And I really only went so that I could finagle a tour to see if Ceiling Cat was still in my office, and he was still there watching somebody theoretically masturbate.
Dude, just the last 2 stories you told are perfect buttons that somehow are going to work their way in.
There you go. That's my contribution. I'm happy for it.